Welcome to How Preschool Teachers Do It.
This is Alison Kentos. I am an early childhood educator.
And this is Cindy Tarabush. I am an early childhood consultant.
This podcast is for parents and early childhood professionals.
Let our experience and research-based knowledge become your guide. Hey, preschool peeps.
Hi, peeps.
We are here today to learn how STEM became STEAM, something that I think people are aware of but don't know why.
Right.
Originally, there was a lot of talk about STEM and the importance of STEM. STEM being science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, right? So there was a lot of talk of we need to bring STEM into our classrooms at all ages, including early childhood. And then all of a sudden one day, we started to see, instead of STEM, we started to see STEAM, and programs started saying, oh, we do STEAM, not STEM. And that A is in there, which stands for art. But I really don't think a lot of people know why it was added to the original STEM.
Yeah. It just kind of happened. It's like one of those things that you're told in the beginning of the school year, oh, it's STEAM now. And you're like, all right, here we go. Just add another letter in. You don't even think about it. You got so much else to think about, you know, but it's in there, and it's in there for a really valid, important reason.
It's like art got in there, but we don't know. Are they just trying to preserve it? Is there no connection? But there actually is a really strong connection between science, technology, engineering, math, and art. So that's how we ended up with adding art, because art has a lot to do with mathematical skills. Now, I know that a lot of us, I'm going to include myself, a lot of us think of ourselves as one thing or the other. Like, I'm artistic, not mathematical. I'm into the arts, not so much science. We act like our abilities are like with its very distinct boundaries. I am a math person. I am not an art person. As if you can't be both, and as if both can't play a role in who you are.
Yeah, like it's a very
that's not true.
Limiting. Yeah, I feel like that's a very limiting way of thinking, right? Like if you're like, oh, I'm a mathematician, you know, like, or I'm not an art person, or it's very limiting, as you can be all of those things. Like I think I'm a little bit, not all of them, but a little bit of a couple of them, you know, like I'm definitely a science person, but I'm also very, very creative and artistic, you know, so.
I have never thought of myself as a science or math person. I've always thought of myself as a creative person, not necessarily the visual arts, because I don't draw well and I don't paint well, but I've always been that sort of, had those conversations, you know, where you talk about like left brain versus right brain, right? Yes. Which part of my brain is, am I more creative? Am I more analytical? I think of myself as more creative, not so analytical, but turns out that they are all connected. So I want you to think about children sitting with a piece of paper and doing art, which is them creating whatever they want, not what you've told them to do. So they have this blank piece of paper and they get to do whatever they want with it. And if you want more information about that, you can look back in our episodes. We've talked a lot about the importance of children self-selecting what they're going to do with art materials, and the difference between like an art piece and craft. They're very different. So let's just be on the same page in this episode, that when I'm talking about art, I'm talking about a child sitting in front of a blank piece of paper and deciding what art materials they're going to use to create something. So when you really think about that, it includes a lot of things having to do with math. They are, when they create something, they're exploring colors and shapes, which is the beginning of what we teach young children. From the time they are infants, we're pointing out shapes and colors to them. That's the beginning of math. And those shapes, right? Those shapes eventually lead to learning geometry.
Yes. And I think it's the easiest, most natural way to learn about the shapes is through art, right? Because it's so easy to pick them out and point them out. And they're actually like, because when they're cutting shapes, or if they're making mosaics, say, and the shapes are there, they're like not only like looking at it on a piece of paper, they're feeling it, they're measuring it. I think it's more, it puts it in their brain more like, oh, this is 3 sides. I could touch the 3 sides and glue it onto the paper or make a 3D object out of it. I think it's a more natural way to learn about the shapes.
Well, if you think about, it's kind of interesting because when you think about an adult who's an artist,
Yeah.
they have to think about proportion,
Mhm.
symmetry, measurement, lots
Yeah.
of things about symmetry. I know my son is a graphic artist and he paints, and he's got a thing about symmetry. He likes things to have symmetry. And I
Yeah.
think when children are exploring the visual arts, that's one of the things they're exploring. They're making things and experimenting with things like proportion and symmetry and all that. And in order to be an artist, you also have to have an understanding of patterns, right? So patterning is part of math in the early childhood years.
Yeah.
And you're using spatial relationship skills, because when you're looking at that piece of paper, you're deciding, where am I going to put what? How close is it going to be to what? And when
Right.
children are really young and they first start to explore the medium of art, they go off the paper.
Yes.
They tend to go off the paper. So that's how you end up with paper on easels and then the paint is all around it.
It's everywhere. Yes. Yeah.
Right? Or
Yeah,
the
that's how you're getting
table is
scribbles
full of
on your
marker.
table. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Table's full of marker, right?
Yeah.
Because they haven't quite figured out that spatial boundary yet.
Yes.
It's not that they're trying to be vicious and ruin your furniture and mess up your easel. They just don't have a sense of that spatial awareness yet.
Yeah.
Of, okay, here's my boundary and that's as far as I can go.
Yeah, and I think you can see that as they get older, how that progresses, right? Because like when you're teaching the younger ones, the 2-3-year-olds.
Oh, Alison, you froze for a second. Repeat what you were saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was like, I feel like you could see the progression happen as they get older. So like if you're teaching like those young ones, those 2-3-year-olds, like you are always cleaning up after them after art. And then as they get older, like if you start teaching like the 4-5s, like you could see where they're trying harder to stay in that boundary more. You can see it happening, and they'll still go over because they're still learning about it. But you can see like, I have this size paper, I need this amount of materials, whereas like I remember teaching younger ones where they grab everything because they think everything is going to fit on that piece of paper. And sometimes they really try to get it all on there anyway. They'll put all the glue on and it's layered and layered and layered because they're not understanding that like, I don't need this much yarn or I don't need this much glue. It's like excess, and as they get older,
proportion.
Yeah, it's the proportion,
right? Like how much glue do I need to glue this thing down? You're right. They will flood the thing with glue,
flood the paper
until they understand I need X amount of glue for this size paper that I'm putting on here. It gives them that practice, right?
Yes.
They're practicing learning proportions like that and the space and the spatial relationships, all of which are helpful to people who are mathematicians, engineers, scientists, right, to understand that sort of thing. And so
I think we need
actually
to
doing
allow
art
to
practices that.
Yeah. And I think sometimes like that art component gets taken out, in some schools, like art is being taken away or it's thought of like as a side hobby, I feel sometimes, rather than very important thing. Like, and if you're not giving them the time to practice it, they're not going to know how to proportion or how much materials they need because they're not going to know. They're not going to have anything to fall back on to like, oh, I practiced this since I was a little kid. Now I know. Now I can do it. That you have to give them the time.
I think you have to do a couple. I think we have to do a couple things. We have to give them the time to practice these skills that are early math and engineering and science. And technology skills, all of it, right? The skills are coming out through the art that they're doing. But I think we also need to intentionally make the connection for them and say, you're learning a lot about that shapes. That's going to help you
Yeah.
with math. And if we make that connection, maybe children will stop growing up thinking I'm this thing or that thing, like we do. I'm
That's
creative, I'm not
true.
analytical. Because it
That's
takes
true.
analysis to do art. And
Yes.
and analysis is part of what we think of as science, technology, engineering, and math,
Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah.
analysis. And we tend
Yeah.
to not think, oh, analysis is art. But the truth is, it is. You have to
Yes.
analyze, what do I need here? How does it fit here? How do I put things? What sort of symmetry do I use? Do I put things next to, under, over? It
Yeah.
requires analysis to do art. So
Yeah.
instead of treating it like it's a separate thing, we need to actually and intentionally teach children that art, when we do art, we practice skills that we're going to use for science and for math. And when we do like science and math, for example, we are using skills that we also use to create art. And I think if we intentionally make that tie, then children might not box themselves in so much like the adults have with who am I? Who am I?
Yeah.
I'm
Who
an
am
artist.
I?
I'm not a
Yeah.
scientist, right? Who am I? There is no boundary. If you look at those initials in STEAM, the STEAM in that
Yes.
acronym, there
Yeah.
really is no boundary between all of those.
That's true.
Technology, science, engineering, art, and math all completely overlap.
Yeah. They go hand in hand, right? Because like I feel like sometimes you can't have technology and engineering without math and science, but you also can't have technology and engineering without art, right? And
Right.
that's an important part. That's why the A got added in there. They all go hand in hand. One is not separate from the other.
Right. All the disciplines, and especially when you think about math and the visual arts, they both require spatial reasoning, the ability to recognize shapes and patterns, the ability to compare and contrast, like all these things that are actually part of math. But I don't know that it was ever explained to my generation that way. That's for sure.
No,
And
well, our
again,
generation,
right?
I feel
No,
like math was math. That was it. Yeah, like
that's
that
it.
was it.
It's
You
its
just,
own thing. We
yeah,
weren't taught any overlap when I think about it. We weren't
no,
taught any overlap between all the disciplines, and they all overlap. You can be
yes,
sitting in your, I don't know, let's name a class. You could be sitting in your science class and have to write a paper when you're older, and that's language arts. I mean, there's
yeah,
this constant
yeah,
overflow from one subject area to another, but they were treated as if they were completely and entirely separate.
yeah,
I think that impacted how we see ourselves as what we are talented in and what we're not. And maybe, if I embrace, like, for example, for me, I see myself as a very creative person. And I realize that some of those reasoning skills and thinking skills that I'm using to create
yeah.
actually overlap into the areas that I don't think I'm as strong in.
Yeah, I actually bet you are maybe not the strongest in math, but you are using math and science, even though you don't describe yourself as a math and science person when you do your art. Like I do a lot of, I'm a science person, but like I do a lot of painting and I will be like mixing colors and stuff. And like, that's very scientific, it's
That's
very much
science.
mathematical too. Like how much purple paint do I need here? How much red and blue together do I need? It's a lot of it's all mixed together in there. You just don't realize that that's math or science that you're doing when you are being creative. And I think that's
Right.
because our generation, that's the way we were taught. You are either an English person or a math person. You are not anything else, so choose one. It's almost like you have to choose one. Like I'm really good at English, so I'm going to study writing, and those, I think that's why some of us as adults grew up to become whatever it is that we became. Like if you were good at English, you became a journalist or a writer, or you know what I mean? Like that's great if that's what your talent is. But there's also so much other, there's a lot of writing in science, that those scientific articles alone, those people are scientists, they're writing. You have to know all of it to do any of it, honestly.
So if we go back to how did the A end up in STEAM? Why
Yeah.
did we add that A? Which again, I think nobody explained to us. It just became a thing. It was just
Nobody
like,
did
oh yeah,
explain.
art's important too. No, it's not because
Yeah.
art is important, but it's not because art's important too. It's
Yeah.
because the same skills are being used.
Yes, it's all
Whether you're doing
interconnected. Yeah.
right, it's all interconnected. You're using and strengthening the same skills. So you really can't have one without the other because they all
Right.
support each other. And it's the art that builds many of the children's skills that would enable them to then later on use higher level math skills. And even when I think about what I said earlier about, they're using shapes when they draw, and
Yeah.
that's later
Yeah.
geometry. I
Yeah.
honestly don't think I ever connected. So we did geometry in like, what was it, 8th grade or something? There was a
Yeah.
particular
Like middle school.
grade that was
It was
assigned
late.
geometry.
Yeah.
It was like middle school. And I don't think that I ever connected geometry with like the sort of shapes that I would draw on a piece of paper.
No, I didn't either. Okay. Not to mention like the three-dimensional shapes. You are using a lot of that in art. And that's very much a geometric kind of concept that I definitely did not connect back to like, oh, when I did art and we use spheres or you know what I mean? Like I didn't no. But I think that's also the way our generation was taught. Everything is compartmentalized. Do you know what I mean? Like so you wouldn't make that
Yeah, but
connection.
maybe we should be saying to children, we show them a sphere, and we should be saying to them, and we'll show young children, cylinders and pyramids
Yeah.
and spheres, right? We show them these things and we say, oh, these are three-dimensional shapes.
Yeah.
And then maybe we should add something like, and you can draw these when you're doing art if you would like, right?
Yeah.
You can make these part of your drawing if you want to, because now
Yeah.
you've learned what these shapes are. But again, we don't go from the art to the math and science. We don't go from the math and science to the art. We treat them like they're separate. And I think that we need to more intentionally point out the overlap to young children,
Yes.
and then hopefully they will grow up and expand their idea about what it means to be someone who has multiple areas in which they can apply their knowledge and understandings, not just one area
Not
where they
just
can
one.
apply what they've learned. They can apply it into many different areas because there is this overlap. And,
Yes.
and I'm just going to say, preschool peeps, that's how the NA ended up in STEAM. And please teach children why or how these things overlap so that they don't think of themselves as one type of person or another, but instead we expand their vision of who they are by saying, creative people are also required in the sciences and in mathematics and in technology.
Yeah.
Look at how much technology has even been created,
Oh,
right? So creative brains have a place there. Analytical brains have a place in the arts.
Yes.
And another type of art, which we haven't really talked about in this episode, but we've talked about in other episodes, has to do with music and movement. Mm-hmm. Movement requires an understanding of all these things too. Yes. And so if you think about the arts in a broader sense than we were talking in this episode, it includes dramatic play, it includes music and movement, right? So, and when you think about it, I am not a choreographer, but I suspect that a lot of understanding of engineering and mathematics goes into when they choreograph dances.
And because choreography, it's a pattern, right? Especially if you think about like tap dancing, that's like a pattern, but just with your feet. It's like making music with different types of taps with your foot. So that's very mathematical, but I don't think people think of it that way. They think of that, you're
love
an
me
artsy
some
person.
tap dancing.
Yeah, I know.
I
me
love
too.
Tap dancing. I don't do it, folks. I don't do it. I just love watching it.
I always wanted to learn how to do it. I really always wanted to. But
story for another day.
I'm good enough at that.
Story for another day.
Yeah.
So anyway, folks, now you know why the A is there. You know the overlap. Go and teach it to children.
Yes.
if you already knew why that A was in there, we'd love to hear from you and how you learned that. You can contact us through our contact form on our website, howpreschoolteachersdoit.com. You can send us a message on Facebook. We do read messages. So get in touch with us and tell us, how did you learn why that A is in there? And if you didn't know until today why that A is in there, tell us that too.
Yeah.
Okay, preschool peeps, we will catch you in the next episode.
Bye, peeps.